So good morning. Thank you for your willingness to learn, to ask questions, to self-examine, and to consider making some changes in your relationship with the internet. Joe Grable and I have spent a lot of time, much of June, July, and August, working on this together. We have a great volume of things to share, and every week we have 55 minutes to bring it to you. So we're going to offer you different ways to engage. We hope and pray that this will lead to some changes that will affect you and your family. I'm going to give a word and ask you to repeat it to me for some housekeeping. So the first word is time frame. What's the word? Time frame. We're going to start at 10:30. We're going to be done at 11:30. The reason is, second word, children. If you have children downstairs, we would invite you to go down immediately to take care of your children and love them and care for them. Third word is name tags. Next week we'll have name tags for you. Would you please put them on to greet some new friends? The fourth word is books. The two books we'd like to recommend to you to consider. One is Digital Liturgies, and the second book is Haid's book, it's called An Anxious Generation. Yeah, Anxious Generation. We'll reference it all the way through. But two books for you to consider reading. Every week we'd ask you to read one chapter prior to coming so we can engage more fully in conversation. And then if you wish, look for Samuel's and listen to his podcast if you would. The next word is learning will be building. May I invite you to come every week, because this first week is Joe's going to rehash what he shared with all of us about 4 months ago. It's very important for you to get the neurological understanding of what's happening to bodies and minds and persons so that you can understand what we're going to go for the next 7 weeks. So this is very important, and laying the groundwork. A Kairos moment, so if I can have a big umbrella of mercy. You know I'm an avid reader, and I'm a big learner. This book, and Joe's going to ask me to speak to it in just a moment. This book rocked me. I have been trying, I went back in my notes. I have been speaking from the front of our church since 2007 about the internet, technology, phones. And I've not been very effective in communicating. Joe and I began to talk after his talk downstairs in our church, and having read this book, and the lightning struck for me. Can I have a big umbrella of mercy? Yes. If you want to understand what the internet is doing to us, read this. We are being changed and shaped in ways we don't understand. Here's a sentence. Most people I know who call themselves Christians worship their phones more than Jesus. And I say that because we spend hours and hours and hours on our phones and almost no time with Jesus. Our phones have become our gods. Our phones have become our idols. We are idolaters. We are adulterers. And we and our kids and our grandkids are being destroyed by this God. Now, please don't hear what I'm not saying. I'm not saying no internet. I'm not saying no phones. But I am saying we have to rearrange how we live with our technologies so that the relationships we have with technologies help us become more like Jesus instead of making us more like Satan. So that's where we're going to try to go with these next weeks. So the last thing I want to ask is that you pray. Pray for yourself. Could you say, Lord, will you help me to know what my relationship with the internet is? How is it shaping me? How is it affecting my relationships? How is it affecting my eternity? So these are the things we want to poke at together. And I want to honor this man. Joe Grable is an incredible man.
Right. So as our kids engage with technology, you're saying we've observed as parents some maybe behaviors go south. Just question for you on that. How long have you observed like that technology? Is there a threshold of all of a sudden now the behavior goes south, or? Immediate. Okay.
Like a 20-minute, or a 10-minute Bluey episode might be enough to like shift the entire day.
Yeah. I've been there. Yeah. Yeah, and I think that's because our brains weren't wired to engage with screens. And what that screen engagement does is it actually activates a hormone called cortisol, which is basically stress. And so we don't really quite know it. It's entertaining, it's pleasurable, but it's being disguised. It's torturous, but it's disguised as pleasurable. So the amount of stress we're putting our brains under when we're engaging with screens, there we go, we got the slides. Yeah. I can't believe I'm dependent on slides, guys. It's just Oh yeah. And but yeah, that pleasure is actually it's cloaked. It's actually torture, right? So we got to keep that in mind as we navigate with stress or with screens ourselves, as we're actually stressing ourselves out. But let me just get to a little bit of logistics here for us as Kevin set the stage. Here we are. We did this, right? Now we're here to class schedule, which is over here. Today we're just going to do the logistics, and I'm going to do a little bit of a primer, which was that thing we did back in April. The month of September is actually going to be really setting us up to be able to navigate through the digital liturgies, which will then happen in chapters 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8, which I'm looking forward to. So the first 3 weeks are going to kind of be really intense information for you to set the stage for you to understand the digital liturgies. So in the digital liturgy that'll be up there, chapter 4, My Story, My Truth, that's about authenticity. The second one, which is the abolition of thought, that's in chapter 5. That's about outrage. Chapter 6 is about shame. Chapter 7 is about consumption. And chapter 8 is about the fifth digital liturgy, which is meaninglessness. So we're just going to quickly hit up on the class goals, and then we'll move through. So you'll see there, goal number 1 is to know how the internet, especially social media, undermines Christian relationships and especially biblical wisdom. Goal number 2, we hope to better understand the connection between patterns we see in technology and human behaviors. Jonathan Haidt's book, The Anxious Generation, is going to be essential for us to be able to do this. He does a tremendous job with laying all that out. Goal number 3 is we're going to tackle the theology of embodiment. We're actually going to do that and unpack that next week, which is a central theme to this book by Samuel James. Goal number 4, we want to understand these 5 digital liturgies and how they create what we call spiritual blockers and then relational blockers as well. And then the last 2 goals here, we want to understand the digital liturgies and how they seem to be selling us something known as the good life, but instead result in dislocation, distraction, distortion, disembodiment especially, which prevent us from living out an embodied experience as disciples of Jesus. And of course, we hope this class will result in some actionable steps as well. We've kind of already talked a little bit about our hopes here for the class, so I'm just going to jump in and give you some brief backgrounds on the developing brain. We're going to talk about social media. We're going to talk about the harms caused by social media. And then at the end, hopefully we're going to actually string them all together for you so you're going to understand what I'm talking about for this whole time. So if at 10 minutes in you're like, man, these are all points that I don't see how they're related, just hang with me, okay? Let's talk about the brain real quick. The first piece of the brain, pause for a second. I'm not printing out 100 slides for everybody here, so bring a notebook or something if you're one of those note-taking kind of people, or if you happen to have your device with you. for this week. Yeah. Which you could take a picture, I guess. So we'll talk about that. The frontal lobe, this is important to understand because it's in charge of carrying out executive functioning. It's also important to understand that the frontal lobe has the longest window of development in the brain, so it's not fully developed until age 25, as you'll see on the slide. Some of these functions that the frontal lobe is responsible for would be high cognitive functioning, attention, judgment, organization, emotional identification and regulation, motivation and pleasure, impulse control, reading social cues, and controlling your social behavior. And if it sounds like I just described things that teens struggle with, it's because I did. It's the frontal lobe. It's not wired till 25. I know I struggled with those things as well. But for today, I'm really wanting to hone in on the inhibitory control or impulse control. The big definition of that, it involves being able to control one's attention, behavior, thoughts, or emotions in order to override an internal predisposition, something inside of us that pulls us towards something, or override an external lure, a carrot, if you will, and instead course correct, and instead do what's more appropriate. So that's the big definition. The bite-sized definition is it's just being able to slow down, resist a reward based on assessing long-term or short-term risks. This is what teens struggle with, and this is why they're being exploited. The best way that I can understand or describe to you the teen brain is not my idea, but it's hilarious. It's all Ferrari with Kia brakes. It's all about the reward, and I'm not going to slow down to think about it. So that's important for you to understand about the frontal lobe, especially about impulse control. Second piece here I want you to understand is that our brains are wired to create habits and to be efficient. And so during those teen years, the frontal lobe is developing efficiency in these categories, the functioning, the attention, all of those things. Haidt really goes on to explain this really well in his book. He says, brains become efficient by doing two things. One, the selective pruning of unused neurons or synapses, and two, the strengthening or enhancing of those that are frequently traveled. So as you can see on this slide here, the two processes are called synaptic pruning and myelination. And do you like my artwork up there? That is all clip art from the slides, which is pretty cool. Yep, I didn't steal any images. But the big definition of synaptic pruning is that elimination of unused neurons and synapses in order to help increase efficiency of the brain's neural pathways and strengthen connections. Myelination refers to the coating of those axons with the insulating sheath called the myelin sheath, which is just like this fatty material that basically makes transmissions go faster. And that also helps increase the speed and connection across longer distance. Constellation of neurons. So short version, again, pruning is cutting away the unused connections while myelination is beefing up or enhancing. That's going to be important because those go hand in hand for habit formation. Haidt goes on to basically say, because this is one of the most important pieces, because how we dedicate our time, especially during that frontal lobe development, is basically setting the stage. It's creating structural changes within your brain. Quite literally structural changes in your brain, especially if those things are rewarding. So whether we spend that time during those frontal lobes, the frontal lobe development thinking about music or practicing scrolling, what you do during that time is going to create a very structurally formed thought process. Neurons that fire together, wire together is the saying that you can use to remember that. So basically, this habit of cutting and enhancing work together to create habits that result in increasing speed, efficiency, and automation of these. That's how sometimes you can end up all of a sudden get to work and you didn't realize how you got to work. You've done it so many times. Has anybody done that? It's scary, isn't it? Yeah. Also, the other one is, you gotta check my phone. Check my phone. It's becoming habits. So, not that adults can't create habits, but teens can create habits that structurally change their brain far more easily than us. That's why this is important. Another way to think about this, if you are looking at me with glassy eyes, is if you've ever gone hiking before, there's clearly a trail that's been walked on. That's the path and the easiest one to go through. Obviously, you could cut through the bush, but you're probably not going to do that. That's what's happening in this period of time. And then, I keep looking over here. I feel like it should be over there. The next piece here is just a piece about teen development. This is the most scientific term you'll see, which is the three-headed teenage monster. Basically, what I've been able to observe in working with teens and young adults is usually with all teens or young adults, alongside their presenting problem, two or more of these are gathered. There's either a desire, a strong desire for social acceptance, or if there's social exclusion going on. There's always hormones involved, so that's pretty obvious. And then impulse control as well. But the most important one here that I see that teens value the most is the fact that they want to be socially accepted, which brings us to being able to talk about social media, if we can swing to the next slide. All social media has the same goal, which is to gain and maintain your attention. We understand that as a group, right? It's all about beckoning your name and, hey, I got something good for you here. They do this in a number of ways. They do this through algorithms, they do this through variable reward systems, and they also do this through leveraging the concept of novelty. They obviously have other strategies that I'm not privy to, but these are the three that I understand. I want to talk to you about algorithms real quick. Can you raise your hand if you've heard of algorithms before? Okay, yep. And do we know what algorithms do? Reinforce something, right? Algorithms' job is to determine how content for you, specifically, would be filtered, ranked, selected, and recommended based on what you've done before, based on the data it's collected from you before. So they collect your data, they track your searches, your likes, your follows, how old you are, your gender, all of it, practically when you go to the bathroom. And then based on that information, algorithms then narrow and filter down what you search, when you search for it, and they provide recommendations to you. So my friend Josh Smith here, he's a Vikings fan, and if he Googles a Vikings article, then pretty soon he's probably going to get on his feed Viking stuff, right? That's because this is their year. Right? But they all drive towards gaining your very own personalized attention. And C.S. Lewis fans in here, you would understand when I say this. This is your digital wormwood. It is beckoning your name, it is figuring out you and learning more about you and figuring out how can I just distract you and entice you to keep you away from doing what the Lord put us here to do. That's a little bit about algorithms. Is my pace okay? Yep. Number 2, variable reward systems. Again, clip art. That's a rat and then a lever and then a piece of cheese. So, variable reward systems, what they do, this isn't something that social media invented, it's something that social media uses. That leverages the reward circuitry in your brain. That's really about getting pleasure, really. And as we know about pleasure, we have a connection between pleasure and dopamine. So the dopamine release is pleasurable, but what's really interesting about dopamine release is that it does not provide you with the feeling of satisfaction. And that's essential to understand in the variable reward system, is that it just makes you want more and more of what triggered the release. So we basically are motivated to repeat behaviors for that dose of pleasure. Social media specifically calls the variable reward systems and that pleasure that they give you, they call those things gratification tokens. Little red icons or things like that. Little buzzes. Bzz. Yep, there's something there. Sorry. This is the rat presses the lever and it gets a treat. And again, Jonathan Haidt's going to do a better job of explaining this to you all than I am, so I'm going to read it from him. When he explains why variable reward systems have such a strong impact on behavior in his book, The Anxious Generation, he says, it's best not to reward a behavior every time the animal does what you want. If you reward an animal on a variable ratio, such as 1 time every 10 times on average, maybe sometimes fewer, sometimes more, you actually create the strongest and most persistent behavior. So when you put a rat in a cage where it's learned to get food by pressing the bar, it gets a surge of dopamine in anticipation of the reward. It runs to the bar and starts pressing, but the first few presses yield no result. It keeps pressing. It keeps pressing, and dopamine's levels continue to rise in anticipation of the reward, which will come at any minute. When the reward finally does come, dopamine keeps going. They want more, so they keep pressing. He then makes the connection between this and the bottomless feed on your social media scroll. You never have a signal to stop. So this is that old school Skinner psychology, and I'm going to do a quick activity to give you an idea of what an anticipatory response looks like or feels like. I think we already kind of know it, but I want everybody right now to think of lemons. Can you think of lemons for me? What do they smell like? What do they taste like? Feel it? A little saliva production going. That's an anticipatory response that you have learned to associate with. Well, with our buzz, bzz, we start to feel the itch to check that. And I'm going to tell you right now, this is a true story. I've sat with people through some really devastating experiences. And that cell phone's in the room every time. And I was in the midst of sitting with somebody one time, and they were unpacking with me one of their most traumatic experiences of their life. Just coming. Tears coming. Zzz. Tears still coming. Zzz, zzz. Completely wrecked. Everything she was doing. She checked her phone. She checked what that buzz was. And for me, that was just eye-opening, the fact that somebody could be in the most vulnerable position, sharing one of their deepest hurts, and the anticipation of what that reward could be was so strong that they just had to check it.
Joe, can I add one to you? So, umbrella of mercy again. A couple came to see me 2 years ago because of challenges in their marriage. In the midst of the most intimate union, zzz, zzz, the husband leaves the wife to check out the phone. Can you imagine sitting with that couple in my office following that? That's what he's talking about.
And that's what the variable reward system is leveraging. And it's not like it's this wacky concept that hasn't been used. It's been used for a long time. A lot of authors have talked about how it's been used. Just to let you know, this variable reward system brought in $35.5 billion last year in revenue, specifically with a slot machine, because that's all the slot machine is. It's a variable reward system. You put a quarter in, you don't know what you're going to get. So, which is interesting. Of all the things that casino can bring in money, sports books and all these things, slot machines bring in over half their revenue because they just have this very simple strategy. You lose. So, the connection between social media and slot machines has been frequently referenced by many authors, including John Mark Comer in his book, The Ruthless Elimination of Hurry, which I think is fabulous. But it's clear the variable reward systems exploit that strong desire for pleasure that we have in order to gain and maintain our attention, which is the point here. But it's really difficult for us to talk about pleasure and not talk about what's called the law of diminishing returns. Has anybody heard of the law of diminishing returns before? Kevin, your voice is a little soft. I'm going to ask Michael to share that one.
To get the same reward, you have to do it more and more.
Yeah. Yep, so over time, the pleasure of a particular activity dwindles. And so in order to get the previously experienced threshold of pleasure, you got to do it more and more and more. So that's really interesting for us to understand that exists. So social media would be pulling that, and obviously they would be needing something more and more and more and more. But they found this new way specifically to leverage this concept of novelty. And novelty actually has a way of sort of replenishing that dwindling experience, because when you experience a reward and it's new, that pleasure, that dopamine you get is actually, I don't want to say double, but it's more. It's significantly more than just the activity. So social media then leverages the novelty piece, which in this instance would be, what is that new or unseen notification saying? Or how many people or how many requests have I gotten, whatever it might be. Or it's the next funny cat video. An example of this is the bottomless feed. It's also autoplay. We're not going to give you enough time. We're just going to feed you with new and new and new. So to summarize this slide here, variable reward systems get you to engage and then re-engage, while the algorithms are there studying you and pulling data to give you more and more content to feed on the other side. And then they're just really leveraging the fact that we are wired to experience good things. We want that, and they work hand in hand. Ultimately, this leads to their financial gain, but it does come to a cost, for sure. So this slide here is about attention economy. I'm actually going to read from Comer real quick, because have you read this book, anybody? I like just the writing style. He's pretty funny. Give me like 2 minutes. There's a Silicon Valley insider named Tristan Harris doing some really interesting work. He points out that slot machines make more money than the film industry and baseball combined, and even though they only take a few quarters at a time. Because the slot machine is addictive, and those small amounts of money feel inconsequential in the moment. It's just a few quarters, right? But over time, they add up, in the same way the phone is addictive. Small moments, a text here, a scroll there, an Instagram here, they all add up to an extraordinary amount of time. See, Harris was a design ethicist and product philosopher. Oh, man, I'm glad I could say that, because when I had to read that before, it was like tongue twisters all over the place. Whew. But eventually he grew disenfranchised with the tech industry. He left and started up a nonprofit for the sole purpose of advocating for a Hippocratic oath for software designers, because right now, he says, everything is being intentionally designed to distract and create addiction, because that's where the money is. Comer goes on to explain Sean Parker, the first president of Facebook, now calls himself a conscientious objector to social media. In an interview, he said, God only knows what it's doing to our children's brain. The thought process that went into building these applications, Facebook being the first of them, was all about how do we consume as much of your time and conscious attention as possible. And he goes on to say, and that means we need to sort of give you a little dopamine every once in a while, because someone liked or commented a photo or post that you had put up. And that's going to get you to contribute more content, and that's going to get you to get more likes. See, it's a social validation feedback loop, which is exactly the kind of thing a hacker like myself would come up with, because you're exploiting a vulnerability in the human psychology. So Comer goes on to say, in moments like these, we're able to see behind the curtain of what my friend Mark Sayers calls digital capitalism. Economists call it the attention economy, and Harris calls it the arms race for people's attention. See, a company can get your money if and only if they get your attention, which is, as he says, cue a terrifying trend. Our attention span is dropping with each passing year. In the year 2000, before the digital revolution, it was 12 seconds. He goes on to say, not exactly like we had a lot of wiggle room here, but it's dropped to 8 seconds since then. That was in 2015. He then goes on to say, to put things in perspective, a goldfish has an attention span of 9. That's right, we're losing to goldfish, he says, but the odds are not in our favor. There are literally thousands of apps and devices intentionally engineered to steal your attention. And Harris isn't the only refusenik in tech, nor am I the only pastor to sound the alarm. Stories are leaking out of Silicon Valley tech execs paying through the roof for a device-free private school for little Johnny, which seems to be the epitome of Biggie Smalls' maxim, never get high on your own supply. So this is the part where I have to acknowledge something. I'm coming across heavy-handed against social media. It's what I've seen, it's what I've observed, but I'm not here to say that all of tech or all of social media is inherently evil. It's not what I'm saying. But it does mean we have to have a heavy, heavy awareness of what destructive shaping powers social media can have. Kevin and I have talked about this, and it's a spiritual battleground. Every time you open up your phone, it is a front lines. Am I right? And so if we don't see it that way, we're walking out to battle in flip-flops. We are unprepared. And so this is why I'm presenting this information, is just to increase awareness so then we can have the right vision on it. But back to the slide. So whether you call it attention economy or digital capitalism, or the arms race for attention, the race to the bottom, whatever you want to call it, two things are clear. Your time and attention equal their profit. This slide here shows the ad revenue in billions. Facebook, 131, Instagram, 50.58, TikTok, 13.2 billion, 4.6 for Snapchat, all combining for just under 200 billion. All this is just basically to say tech companies have successfully gained and maintained our attention. And it's all been for their own financial gain. So you'll see here that, hang on one second, one more thing. The clock and the money sign, right? This is really important for us to make one more connection. Again, Jonathan Haidt points out countless studies where researchers have studied time use, and they routinely find that teens, on average, an average teen, spends over 7 hours a day on their device. And it's not uncommon, and it is not uncommon for me to see teens with over 13. And those studies do not include school or homework. So that 7 hours of screen time certainly has an impact. And Jonathan Haidt, again, is explaining what those 4 foundational harms are, as he points out here. Number 1 is this concept of social deprivation. So the social media has extended to kids what they think is a way to be socially connected, but it's actually resulted in the opposite, which is social deprivation. This chart here is pulled from Haidt's book. This is the daily average time spent hanging out with friends. The gray bar that you see there, the shaded area, is the window that he says is the great rewiring, great rewiring of the childhood brain. This is when, 2010 is when the iPhone came out with the front-facing camera, and when I think Instagram launched mobile only. A lot of things really came into play here in 2010. So that's pretty staggering. We're hanging out less. It's also impacting that frontal lobe thing, the social cues and social behaviors. I just have to share this example. When I was on my way to Minnesota, where I had to go in to pay for gas, and I went, and the cashier, he's a younger kid. He just does one of these. He points to a piece of paper that's hanging on the pin pad. He just points to it, gestures, read this. And I was looking at him, I'm like, so I kind of gave him the look I'm going to make you tell me what you need to say here, you know? He's like, you got to read the sign. And I'm just kind of like, what? What do you mean? He's like, yeah, just read the sign. I was like, the sign said pin pad or chip reader doesn't work. You have to swipe. And I'm like, are you serious? The social cue, the social devastation as a result of spending 7 hours a day on the screens is it's staggering. Anyway, sleep deprivation is the second harm. Haidt makes this very clear as well. It wasn't until, as you can see on the graph, it wasn't until that 2010 time period when social media really infiltrated and screens really infiltrated our teens, that sleep deprivation happened after that. And that screen time comes from somewhere. You want to know where we're getting 13 hours, it's because we're spending time here instead. The negative impacts of sleep deprivation include depression, anxiety, irritability, cognitive deficits, poor learning, lower grades, more accidents, the list goes on and on. So sleep deprivation, in fact, creates and snowballs even more issues we have here today. And to further make the case against big tech, Netflix former co-CEO Reed Hastings said on an earnings call that their biggest competitor wasn't Hulu or Disney, but it actually was sleep. And well aware of the fact that they're designing products for addiction. It's after me, I'm telling you. Attention fragmentation is the third one. This is that goldfish thing. Many adolescents get hundreds of notifications a day. Haidt's pointing this out as well. The average teen, this is staggering to me. The average teen gets one notification every 5 minutes. And with heavy users getting one close to every minute of their wake time, which is wild. Now remember, this isn't just like an interruption like a book fell on the ground. That's an interruption. But what this is talking about is the bzzz, that lemon salivating anticipatory dopamine response. I wonder what's there. And kids have phones on games on their phones and all kinds of things. And Haidt, in an interview that Haidt was talking about, he was on a podcast, and he goes and says, I cannot imagine. Remember the TV carts they used to wheel in for like watching like a science video? He's like, I cannot imagine everybody just wheeling behind their TV carts into their classroom and sitting down and then plugging them in and having their video game system there. I can't imagine how focused I would be if I had that. That's one of the cases that Jonathan Haidt's really working on presenting with his book. So we shouldn't get phones out of schools. I really hope we get that screen back up here. So I got some good stuff to show you.
Oh, can I jump in? If you don't find yourself being a reader and you like diagrams, this book has all kinds of data in diagrams and pictures. So if you want to catch the stuff that Joe's saying quickly, look at the book, get the diagrams.
Yeah. The fourth foundational harm that Haidt puts into play here is just addiction. Going back to the habit formation with myelination and synaptic pruning and all of that, it creates that addiction piece that forms, it actually is kind of described as wearing smooth paths in the brain, basically. The developers of the most successful social media apps have used these brain-based activities or techniques to hook people. Remember, dopamine release is pleasurable, but it's never satisfying in this context here. And so that's really what they're trying to do. So, okay, this is where I'm going to try to bring it all together. So if we got glassy-eyed, that's cool. I'm going to try to walk through this sentence here just to loop it all together. So if you see up here, we see social media uses that algorithms, the variable reward systems, and the novelty with specific knowledge of the developing brains, certain vulnerabilities of the developing brains, in order to exploit the developing brains, because we understand the developing brains have these vulnerabilities. In order to gain and maintain those developing brains for their attention, or for their money, which ultimately, the end result they don't care about, but what ends up happening to us, who they're profiting off of, is the social deprivation, sleep deprivation, attention fragmentation, and addiction, all end up pulling us further down into depression, anxiety, and of course, addiction. So you might be sitting here saying, there's a room full of adults, why are you talking about teen brains? Well, these things impact us as adults too, but they have a unique opportunity with a teenager whose frontal lobe is still developing to catch them while they're malleable. Because if you can catch them while they're malleable, that's where you can create a lifelong user. See, 7 hours a day on your device ends up being 49 hours a week. And 49 hours a week ends up being 2,548 hours a year. And over the course of high school, from freshman to senior year, that's over 10,000 hours. Remember what we said earlier about 10,000 hours being an important number to remember? If they can get you during your most vulnerable developing time, that most vulnerable window of development, they can create a lifelong user with no advertisement. I don't want to use the harsh word of saying lifelong addict, but I kind of do. Because if they can get you in that lane, I think 10,000 hours is long enough to create a structural change to create lifelong habits. So, and what Samuel James will really line out for us, which I think is a even more important thing, it doesn't just have a negative impact on our brains, but it has a devastating impact on our spiritual development as well. And that's what Samuel James is going to be talking about mostly. So, I'll end with this quote from Samuel James, and then maybe we'll swing to a little bit of discussion. But our tendency is often to think of technologies as just neutral tools that do whatever we ask them to do. But this is not quite right. The web is a language-shaping habitat that transforms how we think. The question is not whether we will be shaped by the web. The question is, how is the web shaping us, and how do we respond? So
here comes the color commentary. I don't want to exaggerate, but you have to figure this out. You have to figure out what your relationship with the internet is, because it is absolutely impacting every part of your life. And if you don't agree with me, I'm sorry. It is unbelievable what it's doing to us. So our hope is, as Joe keeps sharing this bigger picture, our hope is that you're going to be moving toward conversations with other people that you love and trust. And you're going to say to those you love and who love you, how can we together live a more embodied life? So the story I told with Joe 4 months ago. Every year, high school women with their moms come to see me because the girls are sexting pictures. And every year the mothers leave, the girls are in trauma because their moms have caught them, told, come talk to the pastor. So they're embarrassed. I do the same thing every year. I say to the young ladies, the answer to the question is no. The answer to the question is no. And then I say, please take off your shirts. No. Right answer. How can you take nude pictures? And for 7 years in a row, the girls could not tell me why. Joe helped me understand why. If you live in the world of the internet, you become a disembodied person. Your relationship with a phone is not who you are, but it is. And so these young women cannot put together sending nude pictures is sending you, because they're living disembodied lives. So what we're asking you to think about is, can you create relationships with your people where you live embodied lives? So when you're all in the same house and everyone's on their own phone, that's disembodied living. When you go out to dinner and everyone's on their own phone, one more story and I'll quit. I'm always amazed when Kyle was playing in the NBA. If you want to sit in the front row, you buy between $1,000 and $6,000 for a seat. Next time you watch a professional basketball game, look at all the people who are paying $1,000 to $6,000 on their phones. Here are some of the best athletes in the world, 20 feet away, and they're right here. That's disembodied living. And that's what we're asking you to pray about. Lord, would you help our family, our people, help us to live embodied lives with each other.
Yeah, and I think as Kevin and I have talked about what our hopes are and what we've kind of had conversations about what James's hopes are, we've come to the conclusion that James's hope to the readers in this book is that we be reconnected, reshaped, and reoriented in relationship with him, with God, and then also with others, rather than being oriented or shaped by the distorting wisdom of the web. So those are the two polar selves, which we're going to learn a little bit more about next week, specifically when we tackle theology of embodiment. So we have about 8 minutes left, and we had some discussion questions that maybe might be worth exploring. Do you want to run it? No? You want me to run it? Okay. Yeah, maybe just pick one of the questions here at your table and just kind of have a little bit of conversation. I'll give you about 4 minutes, and then we'll bring it back together and just kind of want to maybe get a little bit of a feedback from the group as to maybe what stood out, what questions do you have, any of those comments. So go ahead, 4 minutes. All right, everybody, can we wrap up your comments? Seems like table conversations were going well, so we're just going to let that information stay with you all. I'd like to send you, possibly feeling a little bit spirit-led here, to provide a gentle challenge. I would like to extend a challenge to you guys, because how we get reoriented in this is going to be, how do we get the phone off of our body? How do we start to become living in more of an embodied experience? And how do we remove that distraction? And so I would like to challenge you all to leave your phone at home next Sunday, or at minimum in the car here. I understand there may be some people who have a long commute or drive by themselves. But if you would be so, just pray about that. If you would be willing to do that, I'd like to just see how that is for us, okay? I don't expect anybody to start sweating and going through withdrawals during the class or anything like that. But maybe just bring it in, bring that into your prayer, and then try to just leave it at home, okay? I'm going to close this in prayer. I know we got to get out of here to go get kids and stuff, so if you would join me in prayer, that'd be great. Dear Heavenly Father, I pray for this group of people here in this room that have listened to your still small voice to come and sign up for this class, and I ask that you be with them as they go throughout their day and their week, that they become aware and can hear your voice, that they are able to be the hands and feet of Jesus as they become more embodied in their interactions, Lord. I ask that you be with us as we continue to navigate this digital world, and that we have the discernment to know when and where to enter into that digital world. Thank you for this opportunity, Lord. Amen. Oh yeah, last reminder, you have to read intro and chapter 1 for next week. Don't forget that. Yeah.